So that's what it takes to clean up Sincrude Towers in Fort McMurray, Alberta, is basically a mountain with fists. Hold hands and close your eyes. It's midnight, and you're listening to the Ghost Story Guys. Welcome to the Ghost Story Guys. I'm Brennan Storr.
I'm Paul Bestall.
And this is the show where we talk about spooks, specters, and all the other things watching us from the shadows beyond the campfire. Some conversations only make sense after the sun has set, and this is most definitely one. Thanks for tuning in. This is episode number 216, and we're coming to you from that tiny mountain cabin you dream about, but can never quite reach. Paul Damien Bestall, you have risen from your grave to be here with us today. You have had a very busy last couple days.
Yeah, I'm all right, actually. I think I'm just high on Holly Johnson. That's as high as it can get. High on seeing pensioners dance to relax. It's something I never thought I'd experience in my life, but that's the Great British Public for you.
That concert sounded like a blast. Why don't you quickly give everyone a rundown before we get into the stories?
Yes, so Welcome to the Pleasure Dome is probably my favourite album of all time, which was released in 1984, and Frankie Oce's Hollywood were one of those incredible bands that burned extremely brightly and disappeared very quickly, and I was obsessed with them as a young man, and so I've never had the opportunity to see them perform properly, really, since they split up. And so Holly has been on his own since 1987. He's had some modicum of solo success, but has become a leading light in the British LGBTQ plus community through his facing down being diagnosed as HIV positive in the beginning of the 90s to becoming a celebrated artist, a champion for equality, and continuing to perform as a musician. And so it was nice to get a chance to do that. And I just thought, well, you know, I've always had this philosophy for the last few years that you never know what's around the corner sometimes in life. And if you get an opportunity to see an artist or a performer that you really like, then you should go. Because if there's one thing we all know about the music industry is things can take a turn for the worse with no real indication. When it started, I was thinking, well, I knew what the set list was, and I was thinking, well, you know, are we going to just do that? But they started off essentially with the first side of the album, which is the full. It's about 13 minutes and 47 seconds of Welcome to the Pleasure Dome. And they did that full version. And within about 5 seconds, I thought, fuck me, we're off. And then I just burst into tears. Julie said to me a couple of times, she went, oh, do you know the words to this one? I went, yeah. That? Yeah. And she said, and every single song, I knew every single word, all the solo stuff, the weird B-sides, solo single that nobody bought. And so, yeah, it was marvellous. And it was joyous to see so many people from very different backgrounds who clearly hold that album very dear to their hearts as well. It really filled my heart with joy.
That's wonderful, man. I'm so happy to hear it. That's fantastic.
So I'm going to Liverpool to do the Museum of Liverpool next weekend because they've got a Holly Johnson exhibition on. So that's I'm going to see that anyway. So I've just got to try and not buy everything that they're going to try and sell me there.
Fair. Well, I have no amusing anecdotes about concerts this week, although I do have something that ties in to the theme of our episode. So on this show, continuing our summer of Canadian hauntings, as we look at some of the high strangeness from my homeland, which really we, again, aside from the haunting of Toronto, we hadn't done up until this year. We are looking at the hauntings in the province of Alberta. And now I am from British Columbia. British Columbia, for those of you who don't know, that is to the west of Alberta. We are between Alberta and the coast. And I have never felt more BC than I did about 2 days ago when I went into a dispensary that I quite like here in London. And I got talking to the fellow behind the counter. So I was buying a bunch of pre-rolls. And then he made the mistake of telling me that he's into Bigfoot stories. So I sat there buying weed while telling Bigfoot stories to a heavily tattooed man with long hair. and I've never felt more British Columbia in my entire life.
Well, it's a hotspot, really, isn't it?
I mean, British Columbia, absolutely. And as I was surprised to learn, and as we'll talk about in the show, so is Alberta. I listened to some of your episodes where you've talked with authors who have done books about Bigfoot or general activity in Alberta. And again, there was a couple incidents that I think we're going to talk about later, which again, really just surprised me.
It's all happening in the Banff National Park.
Ah, of course. Of course. Well, before we dive into the hauntings and Bigfoot sightings of the province of Alberta, we, of course, have to thank our patrons.
Woo.
This one's for the patrons.
Patrons, we could not do what we do without you. So thank you. Thank you, thank you. For real, guys. Every single person who downloads the Ghost Story Guys, you really do help make us who we are. But patrons and Apple Podcasts and YouTube subscribers, you're the ones who really make this great machine go. Genuinely, it would not happen without you, and we cannot tell you how much we appreciate you. And while we'd like to thank every single Patreon, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube subscriber, we would especially like to thank our latest ones. They are
Beth Riley Cadwell
and Ian Morris. Again, thank you so, so much from the bottom of our terrible hearts. We cannot tell you how much it means to us, but we're going to keep saying it anyways. And if you'd like to get bonus shows, early access to ad-free episodes, a monthly live stream between me and Paul, extra conversations, and a whole lot more. In fact, this episode, patrons will be getting a bonus show where I tell stories from the town of Fort McMurray, which is a haunted town in northern Alberta. You can get all of that by clicking the link in the show notes or by signing up to become a friend of the cabin on Apple Podcasts or YouTube, or of course, going to patreon.com/ghoststoryguys. All right, and just before we throw to our first musical break, I want to give a shout out to our longtime listener, Tiff. Tiff, I know, is going through some really rough stuff right now. And Tiff, we just want you to know we are thinking of you. All right, we're going to take a quick break and be right back.
The Paper People. I went to visit a childhood friend in a town called Hay Lakes, located around 30 minutes outside of Edmonton in Alberta. My friend had recently lost her cousin to cancer, and life was just generally treating her like shit. If you've never been to Alberta, you should know that it's a rural province. Lots of flat prairie lands, farms, acres and acres of fields, and long stretches of highways. On the night, we took Sam's quad out for a drive. I commented from the basket in the rear about the stars and how amazing they appeared out here in the sticks, with no fog or skyscrapers to ruin the view. The dark sky stretched across the plains in a seamlessly endless black. Not a single industrial silhouette to blemish it. It was perfect. After the ride, we went back to her place. We tried to watch TV but got bored. There were no bars in Hay Lakes. Maybe one, but I think it was Scuzzville, and we weren't really interested in that. We smoked a bit of weed, and we lay there for a while, attempting at sleep, but not really. We had too much to talk about for that, and our conversation eventually turned to her cousin. Sam wasn't great at expressing herself, but tiredness and being high aided her a bit, I think. She told me his death made her question her own life. Apparently he had lived life tenfold before he passed, younger than both of us. She said that she had been visiting the graveyard in Hay Lakes a bit. She said that it somehow comforted her a little. The relatives that she lived with offered her no comfort, but they and their issues are another story. I could tell she was starting to get a bit upset, and the subject steered in a different direction, and we eventually fell asleep. Fast forward to the next evening, and we were going to go for another starlit late-night quad ride. But her stepdad had used it that day and it had run out of gas. Nothing was open to refuel it at that time of night in a small rural town, so Sam suggested a drive instead, and I agreed. I loved going for drives at night, especially past all the acres of farmland. We'd travelled down the highway a fair bit when Sam asked me if I wouldn't mind visiting the graveyard with her. I agreed, of course. If they were comforting to her, then I would go with her. I've never found graveyards creepy or understood why others may. I don't know what I expected when the vehicle slowed down and turned off onto the gravel road. We pulled up just shy of the graveyard gates, which looked like something out of a movie, of course, iron and tall and shut tight with a lock. She put the vehicle into park and we sat inside it, just quietly observing. After my eyes fell on the gate, they travelled the length of the graveyard. Beyond the gate, the ground sloped slightly uphill, giving me a looming feeling from my perspective. The gravestones were beautifully decorated and seemed to be scattered in no particular order. Some had pinwheels, some had flowers and garnish. I had to squint to see the gravestones in the back, above the others at the top of the hill. It was pitch black, and the only light source was the headlights of the vehicle, the full moon, and the stars. We were quiet for a while. It probably wasn't that long, but the silence made it seem longer. I felt a strange mixture of calmness and eeriness, or maybe like the feeling you have right before a jump scare. Suddenly, Sam jumped and said she'd felt something graze against her back. I instantly went cold. I told her to lean forward in her seat to see if it happened again, but she was panicking and didn't seem to hear me. She cried that she felt it again on her shoulder, and this time froze. She waited and waited. It seemed to last forever, both of us frozen in place, but I know it wasn't more than a minute. And we waited still, but she didn't feel it again. I whispered to her that she imagined it. We were in front of a graveyard after all. I saw her body began to relax, and she laughed shakily and agreed. Of course she was going to imagine something touching her. We were at a typically creepy spot. She turned the keys and reached for the gear shift to leave, but to our dismay, the car wouldn't start. As quickly as it left her, the panic came roaring back, and Sam was violently shaking the gear shift, trying to get the vehicle to work. I had to grab her arm and tell her to stop. Take a deep breath. She did, and tried the gas again, only this time calmer and with precision, but the vehicle still wouldn't move. We sat back in our seats and breathed heavily, trying to think rationally, when I heard Sam start to laugh. I looked over at her and she pointed to the gear shift. It had been in park the whole time. Relief flooded over us and we laughed. How could we have been so stupid? I still find it funny to this day how we were so spooked by the graveyard that, in our panic, we hadn't realised that the car was still in park the whole time, causing it to stall. I still remember that cold fear though, thinking that some kind of spirit or something had taken over the car and wouldn't let us leave that graveyard. We were a special kind of stupid. After we'd caught our breaths, we decided that was enough of the spooks for one night. Sam was about to shift the gear into drive to leave when I noticed something hanging around at the back of the graveyard. The gravestones in the back, the ones that I'd had to squint at to see clearly, seemed to start to shine or glow. I had no idea. I watched as a little plume of light popped up, which is the only way I can describe it, and suddenly the light began to take a familiar shape. I turned to Sam to see her looking in the same direction, and all I remember saying to her was, "You see it too, right?" She said, "Yeah, I do." I looked back in disbelief. The small plume of light was shaped like a little person, like one of those men figures you cut out of paper. You know the ones? They're cut to look like they're joining hands. It looked like a little paper person, and it started to move somehow. It looked like a blur, like it was coming in and out of focus. And just then I realised it looked like it was twirling. I turned to Sam again and pointed at what I was looking at, asking her yet again, and not for the last time that night, if she could see what I'm seeing. She blinked for a second and said yes. She pointed, but not in my direction. She'd been looking at another paper person on the opposite side of the graveyard. And just like that, More began to appear where there had been none before. We hadn't even seen them appear. They were just there. They littered the back row of the gravestones mostly, the ones that were on the top of the hill, but a few had trickled down. You might be wondering why we didn't step out of the vehicle and climb that fence. Part of me wanted to, but in my disbelief I didn't think to at the time. And of course, as all stories of encounters go, I didn't think to take a picture. I did, however, think to rub my eyes and pinch myself repeatedly. I opened the car door and stuck my head out. Those figures remained the same. We even turned off the car headlights, and we thought maybe they were causing a reflection off the iron gate. The lights went out, but the paper people stayed. There were no other sources of light other than the moon and the stars, and we were adamant on trying to debunk this. If what we were seeing was real, we wanted it to be. We both watched them in awe for a long time. They continued to twirl among the gravestones. Once we realised we were seeing the same thing, we suddenly felt calm. I know this because we both felt it at the same time, and I can't really explain it in words. We discussed it later, after a silent car ride home. I saw Sam lean back, but I mostly kept my eyes on the paper people, thinking they'd disappear if I looked away. They didn't disappear. Not as we were pulling out of the gravel road, not even as we made our way down towards the highway, and not as we drove back to Hay Lakes. I kept glancing back toward them, and I swore I could see them in the distance. I continued to watch them until the graveyard was out of sight. I think overall, my feelings about seeing these weird paper people were calmness. I forgot to mention that. They were kind of beautiful and peaceful in the way that they twirled, like they were dancing. It was awesome.
Originally, I had intended to finish the show with that story, but it just struck me as a much better introduction to not only to Alberta, but to some of the really weird stuff that we're going to be talking about on this show. And I don't know that we've ever had a story quite like that. It reminds me a little bit of the puppet people that person reported. That was on a way back now, I want to say about 3 or 4 years ago. But have you ever heard anything like that?
There's a couple of things like that. I remember somebody talking about seeing something face on, and they thought, oh, that looks weird. And then it turned to the side and it was completely flat.
Okay.
And I can't remember where I heard that experience or read it, but I've certainly seen it. And I have heard of ghosts that sort of look a bit peculiar, like they're paper cutouts, but certainly nothing as distinct as that, because as soon as you describe something like that, everybody knows. We've all done that. You know, you fold your paper over so many times and you get your scissors and you cut them out, and then you've got your little chain of dancing people ready. It's one of those childhood things that we all go through, I imagine, regardless of where you are in the world. It's easy entertainment for a small person to indulge in, with the help of someone handling some sharp scissors, no doubt.
It reminded me of something I read, or listened to rather, on a podcast. I don't remember which one it was, but it was recently, and they were talking about another sort of a theorist who posited the idea that if you're dealing with creatures who exist in a slightly different plane than us, or a slightly different way than us, that the way they present to us would be kind of out of sync with how we see the world.
Mm-hmm.
And so they described it something that, you know, exists differently to us. When we see them, they may appear two-dimensional, like paper, or like a blob. And I thought that was kind of an interesting thought, because this almost sounds like vaguely sort of good folkish in terms of sort of the dancing and what have you.
Absolutely. It would be interesting to look at the tribal lore in that particular area to see if there are any First Nation stories from the particular nations that inhabited those particular areas, to see if there are something similar, because sometimes you can find strange things. But like it said, I think the overriding aspect of that was, for me, I think it's what Sam needed. I think she needed that experience to not necessarily snap her out of her grief, because grief's different for everybody, and it's as long as it needs to be for the person who feels it. I'm not one of those people. I get very annoyed when people put a time limit on grief. I think it's one of the stupidest things anybody can do, because everybody's different, and death and the loss of a loved one, be it a family member, a close friend, somebody you work with, a pet, can be some of the deepest, most desperate feelings you can ever have in life. And I think anything that enables the person who feels like that to get a semblance of calmness or serenity should be welcomed regardless. And Sam might not have thought she needed that kind of thing, but whatever that was did.
And that kind of leads me to another interesting thing I've read recently, is this idea that one of the reasons some people can never have a paranormal experience is because it's not actually what they need. It's what they want, but it's not what they need. And how the paranormal sometimes appears to us in a time when it's providing something we need, but then I think it was Joshua Cutchin said, it's almost like once you've got the message, you have to hang up the phone. It's not something that you're going to remain in constant contact with your whole life. It's kind of like something that comes to you in a moment when there's a lack in your life, or there's a wound, and this can help you close that wound. But again, once you've had the experience, you can't keep going back to the well, and it almost like that's when maybe negativity starts to creep in, is when you're trying to force a connection, because the good thing that came and kind of provided this opportunity, like in the story, it's now moved on.
Yeah, you do get that a lot. I mean, when I've spoken to people, when they talk about crisis apparitions or people seeing the ghosts of loved ones, it can lead to some negativity, because obviously some people think, well, why are they seeing it and not me? Did they not love me enough?
Yeah.
And you've got that rough kind of battle with it. But the more I've learnt about the paranormal, the more I've read, the more I'm convinced that some people will never have a paranormal experience, because I don't think their brain chemistry is the same. I think there is something intrinsically attached to certain people's DNA that enables some of us to be able to see things. And I don't know what the secret is. I don't know whether it's something in your DNA, your blood type, your genetic makeup, the amount of activity you use in your brain, how your synapses fire. I'm not sure. I don't know. But I think there are certain things, because I've seen this before where you get mass groups of people and 2 or 3 people have an experience and the rest don't see anything or don't feel anything. And so I think there's some kind of response on a certain frequency, but I don't know what the reasons are, and I think anybody that says they do is making it up.
Oh, yeah. Interestingly, too, I was reading this thing about near-death experiences, and apparently the more you know about near-death experiences, statistically, the less likely you are to have one.
It's very interesting you say that, because I've just done a big episode on that, and it'll be coming out in a couple of weeks.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah. Strangely enough, with the Canadian.
This is only right and just. I'm kind of curious. Like, obviously, we don't want to spoil the episode for people, but did you have any takeaways or any thoughts on near-death experiences that you wanted to offer?
I've always believed in something in that kind of regard. I've never accepted the dream explanation or the brain activity explanation, primarily because I think it's such a wide scope of experience and they're different things. And I think sometimes people put near-death experiences all in a box. And there's I'm trying to think what the term was. Hang on a minute. Terminal lucidity.
Oh.
And so terminal lucidity refers to those people that are in hospital or hospice who are dying.
Oh, yes, of course, yes.
Who may have Alzheimer's or Parkinson's or have been in a coma. And there are countless experiences of those people in hours, minutes, days, weeks prior to their death. They suddenly snap out of it. And it's suddenly like nothing's wrong, regardless. And they talk about things, or their memories start to fill again, or they can recognise their surroundings, they know what's happening, or they see people in the room with them.
Yeah.
And this has been reported on every continent where humans have end-of-life care, whether it's South America, Asia, Africa, Europe, North America. There are reports from all of it. That is not the same thing as a near-death experience. That is part of the additional benefit. There are different facets to near-death experiences, because those people are going to die, whatever. They are dying. And for some reason, they suddenly recover and become lucid again and can talk and recognise what's happening. Whereas the near-death experience is usually somebody who has some kind of situation, be it a terrible accident, they die on the operating theatre, they're struck by lightning, whatever, and they somehow survive. But during that period, there is a moment where they seem to come away from themselves and they know what's happened. And then when they come back, they are very different people. I mean, one of the shocking things I found out is that the divorce, the divorce rates of people who have had a near-death experience are something like 65%, because they come back as different people.
Wow. I knew people had come back differently, but I didn't realize it was so, like, it extended that far into sort of their life post experience.
Tends to make people more risk accepting as well. They do different things. They take more and more risks with their lives.
Oh, fascinating.
Because they've seen what happens, so they're not afraid of dying anymore.
Of course, yeah.
Hemingway is a prime example of that.
I didn't know that. Was it during the war he had his experience?
When he got shot. When did he get shot?
I think he did.
But yeah, after that, he was like, fuck it. Young, Carl Jung as well.
Ah, okay.
But his was a very different one. I spoke to Christopher Barn about this in one of the books he's recently done there. I spoke a couple of weeks ago. And Jung's near-death experience is quite odd, because he was having it, and then his doctor turned up in his near-death experience, and he thought, I don't think that's good news for the doctor. I'm going to be fine. And then about a month later, the doctor died of blood poisoning.
Holy shit.
But that's typical Jung, isn't it? You know, he's always got to be better than everybody else.
Yeah. I'd rather hang out with him than fucking Sigmund Freud, I'll tell you that for nothing.
But and so now I know I have a far deeper understanding of it, and I think that there is a real momentum as we speak of people trying to find out, because it's the ultimate answer.
Of course.
Everybody wants to know. It doesn't matter whether you're religious, what strand of religion you follow, whether you're an atheist, an agnostic, whatever. Doesn't matter where you live in the world. Everybody wants to know what happens at the end. And we've seen that since the dawn of humanity, since Neanderthals would bury their dead with flowers and trinkets, which shows, once again, a level of intelligence that was often not prescribed to them, and things that we've discovered in the last 30 or 40 years. But this has been with us since the dawn of civilization.
Tower fire. This story is about what happened to me during roughly 8 months in the year 2007 when I lived in the Sincrude Twin Towers low-rise on the 4th floor. While I was sitting at my computer one night in my bedroom, lying on the table next to me was an empty Pepsi bottle. As I was looking into it, I could see my reflection, and then I could see 2 figures in the bottle standing on each side of me. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. They were people-like figures with black cloaks and hoods, and they just stood there. So I just laid the bottle down and ignored it, and went to bed scared, thinking about what I'd seen. The next day, I started hearing papers rattling in my closet. I just ignored it, but it wouldn't stop. I thought it was a rat or something, but I went through the box, and there was nothing in there but a Solomon Bible that my roommate picked up from a guy at work. The next night, a fire broke out 2 doors down from me. We were woken at 2 a.m. by some man knocking on our door screaming, "Fire!" I opened the door and there was nothing but smoke, so I panicked and started crawling towards the fire. I realized I was going the wrong way, so I turned around and crawled till I could see clearly and got out safely. The apartment where the fire had started burned like a matchbox inside, but never burned through the walls or roof. It was totally black and seemed as though it was a controlled fire. The fire burnt itself out within the apartment. By the time the fire department arrived, it should have burned more, but it never did, so we were able to go back to our apartment hours later. The next day, I came home from work and was sitting on my bed when I heard someone unlocking my door. What I saw was a big man that walked across my living room. I said to myself, "That's strange. It's only 5 p.m. and my roommate is home. He shouldn't be home until 7. So I sat there listening, but there wasn't a sound. I walked up to the living room and no one was there. I went back down the hallway to my room to sit and watch for my roommate. Then the same man came out of my living room, walking towards the door. When I ran up to the door, there was no one there. Every day at 5, this man would unlock my door, come in, and disappear. Then every day for 5 months at 5 o'clock, this man would walk in. Sometimes he would come down the hallway, go into my bathroom off my bedroom, and shut the door. I would open that door, and there wouldn't be anyone there. So as days went on, this thing started to torment me by kicking the tub. I could hear the noise throughout the apartment all night long. I would go into the bathroom, nothing or no one there. Came home from work the next day not feeling well. I came in, locked my door, went for a nap, and then a shout woke me. A security guy was standing over me, telling me how he just came around the corner and my door was wide open, and he had seen this black shadow leave my apartment. I was shocked and kind of spooked and left for a while that day. When I came back that night, I went into the bathroom and was fixing my hair in the mirror when I saw a shadow on the wall moving in the corner of my eye. It was a terrifying moment for me. It scared me and I jumped. As I was looking at my shadow, I realized it wasn't me. My hair was pinned up and my shadow had its hair down. I went and got my roommate thinking I was losing my mind. So when he came in, the shadow ran across the wall. My roommate, who was a large man, screamed and ran out of the apartment. I ran after him. The next day, the same thing happened again. A man coming into my bathroom and closing the door. When I opened it, no one was there. So as I went into the bathroom, I was standing by the toilet when I noticed again my shadow started moving. I ran and got the manager, 2 security guards, my roommate, and 2 other people. They were all standing in the bathroom watching as I stood still and my shadow would slide across the wall and down to the floor. We all stood there with our mouths dropped, no one saying anything while I was asking them, "Do you see it? Do you see it?" And one of the security guards spoke up totally in shock and said, "Yeah, we see it and we don't know what it is." So we all left the bathroom, came back in 3 times, and it did the same thing each time we entered. The next day I walked into the bathroom, and as I opened the door quickly, a shadow of a little child was on my shower wall, and it jumped. I scared this thing. It actually looked frightened. So again, I ran out of my room. Sitting on my bed talking to my roommate one day after the bathroom incident, and a voice came over his head saying, "Hello, hello," in a loud, clear voice. We both looked at each other, and I said, "Did you just hear that?" He said, "Yeah." I said, "What did it say?" He said, "Hello, hello." We both ran outside of the building again. So after we regained our courage, we came back to our apartment and went to my room, and a smell hit me. It was horrible. I had never smelled anything like it in my life, nothing even close. It was like sulfur and something rotten. I was gagging. My roommate, he was sitting there and he couldn't smell anything. I was very confused. I opened the bedroom door, took a deep breath, came back inside the room, and it was gone. And while it may have been gone, it suddenly felt like a million wasps were stinging me all over my body. It was painful and kept on torturing me day in and day out. When I would leave the apartment building, the pain would stop. And when I went back, it would start again. I spent hundreds of dollars at the drugstores on pesticides and nothing worked. So I figured it couldn't be physical wasps or any other insects in the apartment. As time went on, in the mornings I would wake up gasping for air like someone was choking me. The bee stings didn't stop either. When I tried to put my hand where the stings would hit, it felt like it would go deeper and bite harder. That was a nightmare in itself. There's a lot more that isn't included in the story above, but if I put it all in, I'd be writing all night. Anyways, the day I was moving out, I was cleaning the bathroom when there was a knock at the door. It was a girl who asked me to cut her hair. I said to her, "I packed and have no towels, so if you go home, get a towel and come back, I can cut your hair." I locked my door, went back to the bathroom, and there, sitting on the sink, was a brand new purple towel, folded. It wasn't mine. I don't know where it came from. I just ran out of there with my stuff as fast as I could go. And as I was leaving the building, at that very moment, 4 apartments went up in flames for no known reason. So now I forgot to establish some facts about Alberta before the last story. So folks, I'm just going to fill you in a little bit because it helps to kind of understand a bit about Alberta before you can understand Fort McMurray. Alberta is the 4th largest province in Canada, both in terms of size and a population. And when people talk about Canadian winters, they're kind of talking about places like Alberta. Like BC gets cold, but Alberta, I think, has the 3rd lowest recorded temperature on record. It reached in 1911 down to minus 61 Celsius. It gets cold. And like I said, that's the 3rd, it's still only the 3rd lowest on record. That's minus 78 for the Fahrenheit types out there. And when you come into Alberta from the west, from BC, you pass through the Rockies. Very picturesque, very lovely. But Alberta is also where the prairies begin. So shit gets flat very quickly. And that, I think, also contributes to the fucking coldness of it.
That's nearly 3 times colder than it's ever been recorded in the UK.
I believe it.
Minus 27 is the worst here.
Okay, so, and the lowest I've ever felt is minus 34 when I was living in Montreal. That was the coldest I've ever felt.
No, it's much better than mine. Minus 18, mate.
Well, it's not fun. It's not a party. I do not recommend it. 0 stars. But Fort McMurray's further up north. It's the center of a lot of what they call the patch or the oil patch. A lot of these oil and gas companies have set up there. Sincrude Towers. Sincrude is one of the companies, one of the many oil companies that operate up there. I cannot think of a more fucking dystopian apartment name than Sincrude Towers. I feel like RoboCop would see that name and keep driving. It's grim. And if you look at pictures of it, it looks like a brutalist nightmare. As a friend of mine put, a lot of the folks who work up on the oil patch in the oil and gas industry, it pays a lot of money, but it's a very full-on lifestyle. And so, it's not uncommon for folks who work up there to maybe develop a little bit of a habit. And while some parts of the story might seem kind of unbelievable, the building is notorious. It has improved in recent years, as I understand it, but I found an article from CBC that kind of tells you a little bit about what Sincrude Towers is like, so you can get a sense of what living there was like. Because when she says security guard, like, my apartment building is a big building. There's a lot of units here. There's no security guards. This is why that building has them. So the headline is, once notorious Fort McMurray apartments designated crime-free. This is from April 22nd, 2016. And it's an interview with a guy they hired to take the place over. And his face, he looks like a catcher's mitt. Like, he's got one of those wide faces you only get from like strike breakers and hockey players. He said, when I first took over the building, there would be 6 to 8 security incidents a night. Back then, staff who got off shift insisted on being walked to their vehicles by security. He said, now we might have 1 incident a week for music. They said the RCMP and this person cannot exactly say how many people have been killed there over the years, but it's more than 1. It's a non-zero number of murders at this place. In 2014, police responded to 75 calls at the complex. And so, again, like this gives you an indication this was a really gnarly place. In the first 3 months on the job, this man had to deal with 3 deaths. 1 resident fell from a balcony, another died by suicide. Faint marks can still be seen from 3 bullets that tore through an apartment door in February 2015, killing a man named Mustafa Matan. So again, this is a rough place, and I think it should perhaps not surprise us that it is haunted. There was one other thing I found. It was from the site Shadowlands. And Shadowlands, of course, just documents hauntings, so they don't have a lot of reference and things like this. But I did find a listing that said Sincrude Towers. 1 person reported that on the 3rd floor of the Mews, 2 condos are known to be haunted. In the first, you can hear what sounds like a basketball being dropped and then rolled on the floor. It is usually heard when people are downstairs at around 11 p.m. The sound comes from above them on the 2nd floor. In the 2nd condo, a teenage girl was grabbed by the arm while she was sleeping. She woke up realizing no one but her was in the room. So yeah, it sounds like quite the place.
Yeah, certainly sounds like the place to be.
The place to be involved in some kind of criminal enterprise. Sure. I mean, if I was that woman's shadow, I wouldn't want to live there either.
Yeah, it's so bad even the ghosts have fucked off.
The ghosts have been held up by other robber ghosts. Yeah, I know. It sounds like that kind of place. It took them hiring a man who looks more like a wall than he does a human to clean the place up. I cannot possibly imagine. When I was living in my old apartment here in London, I was actually approached in a parking lot once by a guy who looked like this. And again, this is a man who looks like a Dodge Ram 3500 brought to life by a child.
It's like Ram Man off He-Man.
No, he looks like a Castle Grayskull got up and moved, this guy.
Well, as long as he don't look like Fisto, you're okay.
Oh, the things that went over our heads as children. But anyways, so I was approached in the parking lot by this enormous man named Cody. And Cody was very sweet, but he said, I have a towing company. And he said, if anyone ever parks in your spot, here's my card, call me. And I got to tell you, I think you have to look like Cody to run a towing company, because I cannot imagine a single person arguing with this man.
He doesn't actually have a truck, he just pulls them.
Just puts the bit in his teeth and tries, yeah.
Like Bigfoot.
100%. I mentioned him once to the maintenance guy. I said, hey, yeah, I hope you don't mind, but like I've had 2 different people towed out of my parking spot because I have nowhere else to park and there's no street parking here. And the sign clearly says the spots are numbered, do not park here. And he's like, yeah, well, we're not really supposed to do that. He said, I said, well, I said, a guy named Cody gave me his number. He goes like, oh yeah, well, he will. Okay. Yeah, he'll come. All right. He's like, he's a super nice guy. Just don't piss him off. I thought, no, I wouldn't piss him off any more than I would kick a grizzly bear in the balls.
Good advice.
Yeah. So that's what it takes to clean up Sincrude Towers in Fort McMurray, Alberta, is basically a mountain with fists. Jeff Peddle, if you ever hear the show, please don't kill me. I admire what you've done there. Unless you've become a criminal in the time since the article was published. It's been 9 years. We've all had a rough time with it. So I'm not going to judge you. And yeah, for folks who want to hear more from Fort McMurray, I'm going to do a bonus. There were so many stories just from there. And I found this on Cold Spot Paranormal. There were so many stories just on Cold Spot from Fort McMurray. I'm going to do a whole patron show that's just stories from there.
It does seem to be one of the last outposts of civilization, really, isn't it? On the way up.
I think so. I've never been up there. It's like Prince George. Why would I do that to myself?
Well, it's not far from the border from the Northwest Territories, is it?
Is it that far up?
The Fort McMurray?
I mean, it's probably about 2/3 of the way up through the province, I would say. So you've still got, that's still a long fucking drive.
Probably the entire length of the UK.
Probably. Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised. I will say that's one thing about Alberta that is deceptive is the distances. Like when I went years ago, I went for a bachelor party to Calgary. And afterwards I went up to Edmonton to visit some family. And I have an old friend who's in the military now. And he was living, I think in just somewhere east of Edmonton. And I looked on the map and I thought, well, it's actually not that far away. And then I plugged in what the actual driving distance was. And Google just said, no, you're not going to do that. It didn't even give me a number. It just gave me a thumbs down.
Are you on a train?
Yeah, exactly. A bullet train? Yeah. Like, it's funny. If you look at the drive from Edmonton to Calgary, it looks like nothing. But it's 2 hours. And it's 2 hours straight. Just set your cruise control and try not to fall asleep.
That's how roads should be.
I mean, living here in Alberta, or in Ontario rather, that's more or less what they look like. So I grew up in the mountains. You got to pay attention to shit. Yeah, if you fall asleep, it's going to go real bad for you. I mean, it's always going to go real bad for you. Let's be clear.
Don't sleep while driving.
Yes. That is the official position.
Words to live by.
The Ghost Story Guys. It is. Yeah.
Literally.
It's funny, actually. That's how we almost died, my family once. My dad in Alberta, because we went to visit my aunt in Edmonton. I was probably single digits age at this point. Yeah, because my parents are still together, so it would have been 7 or before. But my old man used to have this thing where he would just start to fall asleep while he was driving, especially in places like that. And my mom would say to him, hey, I'm going to take over driving. No, I'm fine. His car starts drifting off the road. No, I don't think you are. Yeah, right? Yeah, no, I'm fine. I'm swerving into the other lane as a social experiment.
Do you have sleeping policemen there?
I can't even think of a good joke. I don't know what that is.
So here in the UK, we have bumps on the motorways.
Okay,
and they're called sleeping policemen because when you drive over them, they make you go, ooh.
We call them rumble strips here. I like yours better.
That's a better name.
No, I like sleeping policemen. That's awesome. That's much more, I don't know, it's got very like a Doctor Who thing. Rumble strip sounds like something addicts put on their arm to get juiced in the morning.
Get the syringe and the rumble strips.
Yeah. Like, you know how way back in the day, they used to chew the Benzedrine strips for a jolt? It's like that. I just feel like rumble strips are like the modern day Benzedrine strips.
Woo. Sounds like a cheap beef cut in Taco Bell as well.
Yeah, where they spell beef with quotation marks.
New rumble strips made with real beef.
Yeah, exactly. And they have to say that way in ads. Beef. They spell it with like a BEIF or something. We used to sell this stuff at the store. It was chicken loaf, which is itself suspicious enough. But the chicken was spelled CHICK''N because they couldn't actually call it chicken. So it was chicken loaf.
Could have been there were worse ways to spell the word chicken. I was wondering how many K's you were going to say.
We used to sell this shit for 69 cents 100 grams. No meat product should be that cheap.
I don't think there's much meat in that meat product.
We need more gym mats. There's a handful of old Simpsons heads. We're going to get that joke. We're going to take a quick break with some ads. We'll be right back.
Push. When I was about 8 or 9, we lived on a farm in rural Alberta. You know, like our nearest neighbours were 50 acres away. We had a back porch that was about 15 feet up, and at the base of it were several rain barrels. One day, my mum and I were sitting out back and I was fishing into the rain barrels with a stick and some yarn, when my mum took a phone call and stepped inside really quick to use the washroom. I was outside for maybe 30 seconds when I reached too far over the railing and fell face first off the deck. As I was falling, I remember knowing that I was going to land face first into the rain barrel, which was full. My fingertips touched the water on the top, and being so young, I didn't realise how dangerous that was, and I probably would have drowned. As soon as my fingers touched the waterline, time seemed to slow down to a crawl, and I remember everything so clearly. I felt a hand firmly in the middle of my back between my shoulder blades and a hard push. I remember thinking it was my mum. I did a little flip forward and landed just behind the rain barrel halfway underneath the deck. I sat up and looked around for my mum, but she wasn't there. So I picked myself up, wiped my bloody face off with both hands, and then used both those same hands to open the sliding glass door about 5 minutes later. My mum came back into the room and screamed because now there were bloody handprints all over the window, and I was sitting on my rocking horse with blood running down my face. After I told her what had happened, she went outside to look for my dad because we assumed he was the one that had pushed me. He was an hour away and no one else was around. We're religious and we firmly believe that I was saved by a guardian angel that day. It's not the first or last time that I've had a near-death experience that couldn't be explained as to why I actually lived through it. And that is a prime example of what I was saying earlier about what isn't a near-death experience. You have to actually die to have a near-death experience, not fall into a barrel of rain.
Yeah, that's a near-death experience.
Yes, that's a close death experience.
Death adjacent.
I mean, there are stories like that from all over the place, aren't there? People being pushed, helped, grabbed. I mean, when we did the Lake Lanier episode and we were on about that girl who somehow survived that incredible crash.
Yeah. And that was actually something when I was reading that they were very clear, and I'm sure you guys probably talked about this too, is like you have to actually die for it to be a near-death experience. Like the brain, there has to be no brain function.
Yes. I mean, I was too young to remember mine, but I'm sure I probably had one when I should have been dead when I was born.
Oh, of course. Yeah.
This explains a lot.
I was going to say, speaking of no brain function, I was just reminded of the time I met the former premier of Alberta, Jason Kenney. He was, I think he was the immigration minister at the time. I met him back when I was working on the newspaper. And I remember meeting him thinking, wow, this guy seems like a real piece of shit. Then he was elected premier of Alberta. And yeah, turns out I was right.
It's not a name a politician should have, that. Sounds like a hockey player.
Yeah, sorry, Jasons, you cannot be politicians.
I mean, you could, but not with that surname. It just sounds like a sports player.
Honestly, I think if someone had checked him into the boards a few times, rather than letting him occupy the highest office in that particular province, I think things might have turned out better, because there's a real lunatic running the show there now. And we won't get too much more into that because I don't want to spend a lot of time in politics. But thankfully, most of our American audience doesn't know anything about Canadian politics.
I'm glad we haven't had a shit show here for the last 5 years.
Nah, things are cool and good.
Well, we've had the same Prime Minister for nearly a year, so yeah, things are all right here at the minute.
All right, so I found a thread about some other paranormal experiences in Alberta, and it kind of this seemed like a good place to slot them in. So there was one person who talked about the Frank slide. Now, Paul, are you familiar with the Frank slide?
No.
The Frank slide was something that happened in April 1903. Basically, 80 million tons of limestone sheared off of Turtle Mountain down into Crow's Nest Pass.
Whoa.
Yeah. It happened in 90 seconds. And yeah, it's spectacular destruction. I want to say it took about 70 to 100 lives, though they're not totally sure. Just a colossal, you can still see the remnants of it. And there was another one near the town of Hope. And that one I've actually seen in person. And when you imagine what it must have been like.
Because there was a mad one in Switzerland last week, wasn't there?
Oh, I hadn't heard about that.
It's wiped a village off the map.
Oh my God.
Blaten.
Jesus Christ. So there must have been casualties.
I'm not sure. I saw it over the weekend. I've not had a chance to look into it. I just saw the before and after pictures, and it looks like a nuclear bomb's been dropped on it.
Oh my God. It's one of the scariest things in the world, man.
Yeah, because you've got this beautiful alpine village, your typical Swiss village, and then within seconds, it's now just a massive mud.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that is genuinely terrifying.
They are. I mean, I've seen slides, especially when it's been raining, and you see it just go, and it is unbelievable when you see I've seen big ones in Mexico and South America on the news and stuff. It's absolutely terrifying. But it just, it's nature, isn't it? It's just, it's mind-blowing at times, the power, especially when it's a mountain and the sides just shear off it, and it just, there's no way, nothing standing in its way there. It's just, that's it.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm looking at the Hope slide here. I wanted to bring up the figures. So that one was estimated to be 47 million cubic meters on January 9th, 1965. It's one of the two largest recorded landslides in Canada. In places, the slide buried parts of the area below in up to 152 meters or 500 feet of rock, mud, and debris.
Oh, Jesus.
Yeah. 3.5 kilometers of the highway were destroyed, and it took 13 days for Department of Highways workers to reestablish the route.
13 days? That's some going. Good for them.
Yeah.
I thought you were going to say 13 years.
I will say, man, we get shit done when it comes to this, because there was that one year we had really bad rains, and the Coquihalla Highway was cut off by slides. By slides. And they had that. I think it took a couple weeks, but they managed to reconnect it. And that's a major artery. I mean, that is the major way that you get from west to east across BC is the Coquihalla Highway, and it just came down.
I'd still be having a fucking committee here.
Oh, don't worry. We suck at most other infrastructure things, so that's fine. They're still built. There's a road north of Victoria, like a highway interchange. When I went there at Christmas, they put the actual piece of road in place when Nick was driving up to pick me up. Nothing else has happened since. That was 8 months ago. So don't worry. We're still garbage at most things that involve road related.
Well, that's reassuring.
Yeah. Don't worry.
Thanks for that.
But so this person, some of their experiences. So at the Frank slide, they took a few pictures on an old film camera, and they said there was a white spot on the slide that wasn't in the picture. So they felt like that was some kind of orb or spirit. Who fucking knows? I mean, it's a film camera. A lot can go wrong with film cameras. But this person said when they were living in Grand Prairie, their family went to an old townsite park, and they recall it being near a river, but they don't know the name. Someone else actually, and they said, I went into a church and they felt someone put a hand on my shoulder, but there was no one there. Now, interestingly, another poster pointed out that this was the Dunvegan River, and the Dunvegan River is so apparently famously haunted that Complex magazine published an article which included it as one of the most haunted spots in Canada. And this is what the article says. It says, Dunvegan Provincial Park was one of Alberta's earliest fur trade posts and is now the site of numerous ghost stories. One ghost is a woman who froze to death searching for her husband during a snowstorm. People report seeing a lantern flickering on the North Hill where her body was found. Another well-known ghost is a priest in the rectory who's been seen sitting at a desk and also standing at the window.
Yeah, I've heard of the lantern flickering one.
Oh, you have, eh?
Mm-hmm. I think I saw it on one of those weird Canadian ghost documentaries I stumbled across a couple of years ago.
in the back of Prime.
Somewhere, yeah. Just lurking somewhere. It was good. It was interesting. I liked to hear these kind of stories because we never would have seen them otherwise. So
Sure.
you know, that one's quite good. I like those kinds of because they're obviously built on tragedy, and there's a few of them, and you find a lot of them in the northern US states as well.
Sure.
Like Wisconsin and Illinois and stuff, where there'll be something that happened 150 years ago in the deepest, darkest days of winter, where some poor bugger gets stuck and freezes to death. And then after that, you just see a lantern tragically just trundling along, trying to find its way home or whatever.
And also people in Dunvegan, people report feeling like they're being watched in various areas of the park, and a woman in a long white hooded cloak and bare feet has been spotted there, which is interesting. And that kind of leads into this person's last story from the area, where they said, again in Grand Prairie, this one happened to my sister. A few months after our aunt passed from cancer, my sister saw her in my sister's room. They spoke about a few things, mostly that my aunt was at peace, and apparently brought up things that were hard to explain. My aunt spoke to my sister about things that my sister didn't know at the time, but turned out to be true. My sister said she saw her a few times, but I don't know more than that. And they go on to say, I currently live in Wetaskiwin, Alberta. The rest of my experiences are from here. First, I was finishing work at night and turned by the hospital toward home. I saw a shadow, a man leaning on a cane, very clearly in my headlights. I completed the turn and the shadow completely vanished. I was bringing a coworker home at the time and they didn't see anything. One night I was laying in bed, relatively still awake, and I heard the most horrifying scream of a woman calling my name, and then dead silence. And finally, they were laying in bed and they saw a shadow man, the hooded man, standing at the foot of my bed. It didn't move, and I rolled over thinking I was seeing things. I looked again and it was still there, at which point I, Brennan Storr, would have pissed myself. I then heard it say, "Can I help you?" I looked away and looked back and it was gone. Since then, I'm sure I've caught this out of the corner of my eye, especially when it's getting darker out, but it has never been as clear as that night. And I think that is fascinating, because I don't know if I've ever heard of a story of a shadow person talking to someone.
No, that's quite rare.
Also, I have to point out, and my Canadian listeners, our Canadian listeners are going to understand this, I cannot see the name of Wetaskiwin, Alberta, without hearing the jingle for a used car lot that used to play on television. It was Cars Cost Less at Wetaskiwin. And every single Canadian person roughly my age is going to know exactly what I'm talking about. Because you too are hearing that in your head at this moment like a winter soldier.
Yeah, we've got similar adverts here. If I here in the UK, if I say the words auto glass repair, everybody in the UK will be able to finish that advert off.
Come up like the Manchurian Candidates.
It's like those weird chat line adverts from the late 80s.
Oh, you guys had those too?
0898 27 27 27. Ooh!
1-888-547-7777. That's 1-888-547-7777.
And you ring them up and there'll just be people going, wankers.
You paid money for that?
Some people did, yeah.
Okay. Man, we used to watch those infomercials and make fun of them because, I was getting a lot of female attention back then. So I had, in my busy schedule, I worked in little time to watch TV all night with my friends. Gathering darkness. I'm convinced my house is haunted. Ever since my grandfather, who lived with us, became sick, and after his recent death, my mother and I have noticed a drastic increase in unexplainable things happening inside our house. I always tried to write it off, but this night something happened that truly freaked me the hell out. For some context, we live in the province of Alberta, and our house was built in the 80s. To my mom's recollection, when she first bought the house 13 years ago, there were no reported deaths in the house or any history on the land it sits on. To bring everything back to the beginning of these events, in December 2023, my grandfather injured himself going down the stairs and was hospitalized. Only days after his hospitalization, both my mother and I repeatedly heard footsteps downstairs in the basement. My grandfather's room is down there. Many times we chalked it up to old house noises, wood creaking, settling, and so on, until more physical things started happening. The downstairs bathroom sink running, washing and drying machines being open when they were previously closed, doors being open which were previously closed, items that were once on shelves being found on the ground, entire filing cabinets of paper spilled on the ground, lights flickering / turning completely off when in a room. Once the stereo radio system we had downstairs randomly turned on and blasted the radio for a few seconds before turning off as I walked past. It was a lot. Those were all the things that happened inside the house. What's even freakier, and what made the rest of the family worried, was 2 specific incidents in my grandfather's hospital room, once in front of my mother and aunt, and a second time with just my aunt in the room. The first time happened later in the day after dinner, when my mom and aunt were there. My grandfather leaned into my mother's ear and whispered, "Who's that over there? Is that a nurse?" and pointed to the corner of the room. My mom was confused and told my aunt, and she too became confused because obviously no one else was in the room. They thought it was just him seeing things because the nurses had said he wasn't all there after his fall. The second time was much more intense and left my aunt hysterically, calling my mom over the phone late at night. She told my mom that my grandfather was starting to fall asleep when he jolted up with a horrified look on his face and quietly told my aunt that the devil himself was standing behind her. She freaked out and stood from her chair and turned and of course saw nothing. She calmed back down and sat back in her chair and tried to ease my grandfather. She said he never calmed down and then loudly yelled, "He's trying to grab you." And my aunt said she felt something touch her shoulder, along with a breath on the back of her neck. She quickly called my mom soon after in a panic, and my mom advised her to go home for the night. There were no more incidents in the hospital after that. After that, there seemed to be less activity at our house, until he passed a few weeks ago. Since then, my mother and I continued to hear the odd sound, object being misplaced, lights going on and off in the basement, and so on. About an hour ago, my mom came into my room at about 10 p.m. and randomly asked if I wanted ice cream. It was kind of late for me, so I said no, and my mom said that I should lock the door after she leaves. Once she had gone, I went to the bathroom, and then afterwards promptly locked the door. I also want to note that the screen door wasn't locked, but was definitely latched. After I closed the door, I went back to my room and sat and continued a game I'd been playing, with my headphones on. After about 10 to 15 minutes of my mom being gone, I very clearly heard her voice yelling my name to come grab the ice cream. I got up and speed walked to the door, yelling, "Sorry, I didn't hear you get home." And as I turned the corner to the front door, the door was slightly ajar, the screen door was wide open, but my mom and her car were nowhere to be found. I was really spooked because the sound of my mother's voice had been so loud I heard it over the floor fan and my headphones. I relocked the door and locked myself in my room until my mom got home with the ice cream. I told her what happened and she was also spooked, and together we searched the house in case someone actually got in, but nothing.
Ghost River Crossing. It all started when I began working for a large business retreat about 20 kilometres from Cochrane, Alberta. The piece of land ran along the Ghost River ravine and was centred around a dirt road that wound all the way to the river. The road had been an old wagon trail, so naturally there were ghost stories about spectral wagons and a hooded figure with a lamp that walked the road, but I decided not to believe any of it. I woke up one morning in October. It was overcast and foggy, but as it was my day off, I started to watch a movie. Halfway through, I heard a knock on the wall, but didn't think much of it. And then a moment later, I heard another knock. So, to humour myself, I knocked back, till it responded. So, once again I knocked back, and, no surprise to you, it knocked again. Thinking this was a little weird, I stopped and went back to my movie. About 3 minutes later, right next to where my head was, there was a whack, whack, as if somebody had taken a sledgehammer to the wall. So I got up and went outside to see what was going on, and when I got to the spot where I heard a whack, there was nothing there. I thought for sure there must be a hole in the wall. After that, I was convinced that my friend Bill had done it, so I ran up the hill to the main buildings and found that there was nobody there. I later found out that I was the only one within miles that morning, as everyone else had gone to town for groceries. Things then took a turn for the worse. As I was walking down the hill back to my house one night, I saw a light upstairs turn on. I went and investigated, and once again, nobody was there. I turned it off and went downstairs to bed, as I was too tired to care, and at this point I heard footsteps. They started at one side of the building and ran across out onto the deck and stopped. cautiously went back upstairs to find that the light had been turned on again. So I put some earplugs in and went to sleep. And when I woke up in the morning, I found one of my pots halfway across the living room floor. At this point, I was thoroughly freaked out, so I started to ask some questions. And it turned out that the owner's husband had died recently, and the house he was living in was his workshop and favourite building on the property. I'd also found out that my friend Bill had lived there before, and he'd had the same problems. He told me once that he'd poured a beer and lit a cigarette for the deceased man as a peace offering, and was never bothered again. I tried it out, and to my surprise, I never heard as much as a mouse squeak again. Well, there we have it. If you're being bothered by a ghost, light a cigarette and pour them a beer.
I tell you, man, if I'm ever haunted by my mom, I know that'll do it.
Yes. I don't know what I'll have to do. I'll have to find out who the fairies are that keep leaving wine bottles in her recycling bin, because they're not hers, apparently.
No. I've heard that. They just spontaneously generate.
Yeah, happens here sometimes.
Often around Eurovision. Weird.
Usually in May. Yeah.
Funny that.
I can't work out the correlation.
Spontaneous speciation.
Yeah. Dateline should investigate that mystery.
Yeah, also where my bank account keeps going. I'd love if they could solve that particular conundrum for me. You spent how much on shots? It's mystery. It's a mystery.
Yeah. I always like an odd response to dealing with having a ghost like that. Yeah, just pour it a beer and light a cigarette. It'll be fine. Leave it some beans out. Maybe it likes cheese on toast. Who knows? Give it a try.
I mean, that goes right back to my very first, my shamanic experience way back in like 2013. That dude, I mean, he told me, he's like, just leave a little bit out for your ancestors. Leave if you eat something, just leave a crumb, like intentionally leave a crumb, a piece of it out. And he said that will satisfy them. That's enough. It's more about the offering than it is about the thing. And I know, like, sometimes, like on Beltane and stuff like that, you know, you're encouraged to leave a little bit out, like leave out some whiskey or something like that. I figure, what's the harm?
It's also an old trick to help keep your boggart on side.
Oh, really?
Butter or cream as a reward, and they tidy your house up and keep your fireplace safe. But if you woe betide the person that forgot to reward the boggart.
I mean, it's funny, actually. More and more, I'm seeing myself as some kind of fake creature, because I'm like, I'll do all kinds of work for you, but if you don't fucking say thank you, I'll burn your house down.
Yes, I was thinking about that when they tried to trap me yesterday. The pine cone maze I discovered.
Oh, yeah. So what was the deal there? You posted a picture.
So that's the underpass leading from where I work into Sheffield city centre. And so at lunchtime I walked in and I thought, what? I saw one and I thought, it's a bit strange, pine cone. And then I noticed loads of them and I thought, yes, I'm too switched on these days. Whereas before I just think, that's weird. Now I thought, I'm not walking through that. So I moved to the side and took some pictures and then thought, yes, I've escaped that trap.
So for the folks who aren't in the Facebook group, can you describe what you saw?
Yeah, there was probably about 30 or 40 pine cones that had been placed in a pattern in this underpass that goes under the road, like a walkway. Right. And they were all just scattered in a pattern on the left-hand side as I was walking in. And I just thought, that's really odd. It's very strange. But obviously I put it on my Instagram as well, because I know their tricks. I'm wise to these things.
So are pine cones not native to that area?
It shouldn't be in a concrete underpass in June. There isn't a pine tree near there.
Okay, that is strange.
So they've been brought and left by whoever.
By parties unknown.
Yeah, because usually, I mean, you will see all kinds of detritus there, but I've never seen that. Never seen a collection of pine cones in the middle of the town centre.
I'm just imagining that next time they're going to be less subtle. There'll just be a wooden box with a stick propping it up and a vape.
Free weed.
Oh, man. Before we move on, I wanted to mention that Ghost River, it actually, the name does come from a story of haunting as well. And I got this from a report published in 2018 by the Ghost Watershed Alliance Society. And so there are several stories that they mention as to the origin of where Ghost River comes from, but this does seem to be generally regarded as the most likely or the one that people sort of favor the most. And it comes from Sykes Powderface.
What a name.
I know, right? And they're part of the Stoney Nakoda First Nation. And it was recorded in 2017 by B. Motherwell. So Sykes Powderface, a respected Nakota elder of the Chiniki band, tells of a confrontation that took place between the Blackfoot and the Nakota. Blackfoot braves entered traditional Nakota territory to fish in the Ghost River near the confluence with the Bow. That's the Bow River. These braves had not followed protocols to gain permission, and so a battle ensued in which a number of the Blackfoot were slain. Thereafter, the voices of the slain could be heard from across the river during the night. Nakota people were always anxious to get across the river and arrive home before nightfall, lest they encounter the ghosts of the dead who had been not been able to rest after the confrontation. In 1996, in conjunction with the Alberta government, the Nakota hosted a ceremony to release the spirits of those slain in the Ghost River battle to eternal rest. So that is how Ghost River got its name.
How interesting. There's a few tribal stories of that in the US like that.
Oh, really?
I think Brandon covered one fairly recently on Southern Gothic.
Oh, okay.
Of a similar nature. Not the same, but
right.
It was some kind of... I think they tried to escape and ran into a body of water, and obviously, as was the case till about 150 years ago, most people couldn't swim.
Oh, I don't think I knew that.
That's why so many sailors used to die, because they didn't swim. Nobody knew how to swim.
Oh, fascinating.
It's like when the Mary Rose sank here, Henry VIII's wonderful warship. Most of the people on it drowned because they couldn't swim. Why would you swim? You're in a boat, you see. That was the thing.
Right. I guess. Why would I use my own legs like a sucker? I have a machine to do that for me.
It is one of those things we don't realise about. Swimming as recreation is a fairly modern pastime.
Interesting. No, I had no idea. Although I just want to point out also there's some great parallels here for our folks who are fans of AI to take away from this. Hey, I got the machine to do all my swimming for me. Oh shit, now I'm drowning. You follow the bouncing ball there, folks. On that dystopian note, we're going to take a minute to play some ads so the fans of AI can think on their sins. And of course, remember, if you are a patron or Apple Podcast subscriber, you don't have to listen to ads at all. Sign up by following the link in the show notes or by becoming a friend of the cabin on Apple Podcasts. On the farm. My parents got divorced when I was 10 years old, and when I turned 14, my dad moved back to our family farm a few hours from Calgary, Alberta. My dad had always told us stories about the property and about the relatives and ancestors we had that had lived there before my dad was even born. One of the people my dad would always bring up was my great-great-grandmother, Anita, and even joke about her haunting the farmhouse. Everyone in the family that knew her always described her as a cheerful, peaceful person who was so sweet and innocent she couldn't even bring herself to say the word hell. One night on Christmas break, my brother and I had gotten into a pretty heated argument in the middle of the night. I can't remember exactly what it was about, but it got very loud and very personal rather quickly. We were shouting at each other across the living room when all of a sudden the power cut out. It was 11:30 p.m. and it was pitch black. All we could see was the lights of our neighbor's property. We were all on the same power grid, by the way, so this was pretty unusual for only one farmstead to have their power completely cut off. Me and my brother were shocked. The only reliable light source was the flashlights on our phones. We looked out the window and tried to figure out why our power went off. Eventually, we came to the conclusion that a wild animal, like a fox or a coyote, had chewed into one of the cords on the power box outside. It's a bit of a stretch for one cord to turn off all the power on a farm, but at the time it was the only thing that seemed relatively logical. My brother looked at me and apologized sincerely for what he had said. I did the same. But just at that moment, all the lights went back on. My heart nearly jumped out of my chest. This next story takes place a few months after the blackout incident. I wasn't in the picture as I was away in Calgary for a sports tournament, but my brother was on the farm. My grandparents always put my brother and I to work, but my grandmother had us do more reasonable jobs. She told my brother that the two of them were going to clean up every room in the house. They each cleaned different rooms to save time and get more work done. When my brother got to my room, he saw the crucifix I had lying on my desk, which I already found weird because I always hung up my crucifix on my wall above my desk. Now sure, you could say it had fallen down, but even then it would have fallen between my desk and the wall. Even if it somehow were to land on my desk, there was no dent or damage to the cross or my desk. No sign it had fallen. There was no reason for anybody to take it off the wall either, so why was it there? Anyways, my brother is an atheist, and when he saw the crucifix on my desk, he picked it up and started mocking Jesus and making jokes aloud to himself. My grandmother is a Roman Catholic, but she was all the way down the hall and wouldn't have been able to hear him. While my brother was making fun of the crucifix, he heard a loud thud come from my closet. I don't keep anything in there, nothing at all, so there couldn't have been anything to fall in there. He opened up the closet, and sure enough, it was empty. He slowly closed the closet door and looked at the crucifix and said, "If anybody is here with me, give me a sign." Right after he said that, he heard a loud thud come from the hallway. Not as loud as my closet door, but more like somebody had dropped a water bottle or something. He looked in the hallway cautiously and saw that a teddy bear was lying in the middle of the hall. It was clearly very old, as it had been quite dusty, and even torn slightly in some places. He picked it up and looked into its plastic eyes, wondering if they were going to move. At first he thought that our grandmother had thrown it out of the room she was cleaning. "Grandma!" he called, and she came out of the room she was cleaning, from the other side of the house. My brother went over to her with the bear and asked whose it was. "Oh, that was your great-grandma Anita's bear when she was a child," Grandma said. "She gave it to me when I turned 5. To this day, I am convinced that my great-great-grandma Anita haunts my farm.
A face in the window. When I was around 11 years old in the summer of 1982, my dad was in the Canadian Armed Forces, so he moved around a lot, which I hated with a passion. My mum wanted my sisters and me to still keep a close connection with my extended family, so every summer we went up to my grandparents, on my mum's side, who lived in central Alberta, which was a farming community. My grandparents, who lived in the small town, were devout Catholics and went to church almost every day. The church they went to was about 3 minutes walking distance from their home, and because I loved my grandparents so much, I went along with them, even though I often hated sitting through the long ceremonies. My grandma always wanted to be there early so she could sit right up front, but on this particular day we were late. My grandparents were able to sit up front, but I had to sit in the balcony area, which was narrow and a tight squeeze to get to a seat. I sat near the window that overlooked the courtyard and an old wing of the church, which at the time was not used anymore. As I was listening to the ceremony, I would glance out of this window out of sheer boredom. Sorry to say that, as I was 11, I wanted to be outside playing. Anyway, as I was looking at the old wing of the church, I noticed this face looking back at me out of the window. I don't know why it gave me the chills right away, but I just couldn't look away. As I stared, the hair on my arm stood up and I got the shakes. I'm not sure how long it lasted, but as soon as the face looked at me, I looked away, and when I looked back, it was gone. When the ceremony was done, I went back downstairs to meet my grandparents, who were speaking to the priest. I went to my grandpa and grabbed his hand and asked if we could go home. My grandma wasn't happy with me for being rude for interrupting the conversation. However, when she looked at me, she asked if I was okay, because as she put it, I was as white as a ghost. Sorry for the pun. I said I was okay, but I knew I wasn't. As we were leaving, the priest came to me and told me to feel better and come to see him if anything was troubling me. All I can say was that I was very glad to have left that church and the outside. For the next week or so, I refused to go to that church, which really upset my grandma, but concerned my grandfather more. I hardly ate or slept and was very jumpy. Finally, my grandfather sat me down and told me to tell him what was bothering him. I wasn't sure if I should tell him because I thought, would he believe me or call me a liar and in the end send me back home? After some gentle coaxing, I finally opened up about what I saw at the church. The only question my grandfather asked was for me to describe the man's face, which came as a surprise because of my previous thought. The man's face was very pale and shallow. You could see the cheekbones and jawlines, and he had very dark circles under his eyes. The eyes were also bloodshot red, and he had very pale, thin lips. He also had very dark but balding hair. What I found strange was that there was no body, just the head. I told my grandfather he looked sick, but when he, the face in the window, stared at me, I got scared and looked away. My grandfather looked at me rather strangely, and I almost laughed out of nervousness when he finally spoke. But what he told me creeped me out even more, and still does to this day. During the years of 1918 to around 1920, the influenza epidemic hit the area and the surrounding farming communities. My grandfather remembers that during the winter months it was extremely hard for people to get the help they desperately needed. The winters in Canada can become brutal, and during this time it spared no exceptions. Temperatures dropped to around -44 to -50, and the snow was piling up, making it hard for people to get around. The local hospital was filling up fast, and so they used the wing of the church to help relieve some of the stress. As there were far too many patients for the few doctors and nurses to keep up with, they had to rely on a few volunteers who offered to help. The epidemic lasted over a year and took many lives. That wing of the church had been closed off, not due to the epidemic, but over the time it had worn down and become a safety hazard. Grandfather had remembered he'd heard stories from other people, including the priest, about strange events happening in that wing of the church. There were unexplained noises, voices such as crying, screaming and moaning, footsteps and shadows moving about. The face I saw, as my grandfather and I believed, was a poor soul who had died during the epidemic. For the rest of the visit, and the others that followed, I wouldn't sit up on that balcony. My grandfather was very sweet to say that he would make sure I would sit up front with him and Grandma so I wasn't alone again. Bless his heart, because he kept that promise until he passed away 8 years later. Unfortunately, that church is no longer standing there. Why I say that is because my parents were married there on October the 3rd, 1966, and holds many memories for them. In 1992 it was torn down and a new church was built about half a mile away. Houses now stand there, and I'm curious to know if any unexplained things have been happening in or around that area.
This story doesn't seem a million miles removed from the one we talked about on the Vancouver Island episode.
No.
The Victoria Church, although this is more to do with the plague.
Yes.
Or not the plague, but, well, I guess it was a modern-day plague.
The Spanish flu, ironically named as it didn't start in Spain, it started in an American medical camp. Fact fans.
I was going to say a fact that no one seemed to remember.
I know these things.
Thank God. Well, when the next one hits, I'm sure they'll burn you as a witch.
Well, I'm just glad we've never lived through anything like the Spanish flu.
Imagine how terrible that would be. You'd have some idiot with the most popular podcast in the world just saying shit because all he's got between his ears is dial tone and a bunch of moose meat.
I've heard pouring boiling water down your neck helps.
Well, there's only one way to find out, and that's for a certain podcast host who are at the top of the industry to test it out. But of course, they're going to have to dislodge their head from their ass first, so I don't know if that's going to work. God almighty. Anyways, I think this would be a good opportunity to talk a little bit about some Bigfoot encounters in Alberta. And I was the one that I recall hearing from the podcasters I listened to was the Bighorn Dam sighting.
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit about that one?
Yeah, it's an infamous one, really, primarily because of the alleged sizes of the Bigfoot that were sighted. So there was a crew working there. There was some maintenance going on. A lot of local tribespeople obviously employed by the company to do it. And on one particular day, they'd had some strange things going on, like equipment being moved about and stuff being tossed around and finding stuff halfway up trees and thinking, how the hell's that go up there? The kind of thing that people just write off. Oh, a bear must have taken it there. Yes, of course it must have. And on this one particular day, several witnesses looked to the range above where the dam and the construction was going on and noticed trees moving, and then they saw 2 or 3 what were estimated to be between 10 and 12 foot tall Bigfoot watching them.
Well, that's goddamn terrifying.
Well, there is something about Sasquatch and Bigfoot reports in Alberta and above where the reports do seem to be of an incredibly large size, because the average Christ, the particular range is generally thought to be about 8 foot. And I think when you talk about height, sometimes it's difficult to kind of comprehend, because when you see somebody who's 6 foot tall these days, it's a fairly common height. And it's only when you sort of get to the sort of 6'6" and above that you start thinking, actually, this is big. So when you look at like a basketball player or something, you look at that and you think, Jesus, there's some that are over 7 foot tall. But you're talking about, obviously the tallest human that's ever been recorded so far was obviously the Robert Ludlow. Ludlow? Yeah.
I think it was Wadlow.
Wadlow, sorry, yes. Who was, 8'9"?
Jesus.
When he died. He was still growing when he died.
Oof.
He hadn't stopped, obviously because of his condition.
Was that acromegaly?
Yes, I think so. And if you look at the pictures, I think he passed away. He was only 41, 42, I think. You look at the pictures of him stood next to normal people, and it's incredible. So if you imagine that what these people were reporting were creatures taller than him, then that's just terrifying, because obviously they're not... Wadlow was quite a tall, and he wasn't particularly big, but obviously because of his size, his mass looked... Essentially, he was collapsing on himself because his body couldn't cope with the weight.
Of course, yeah.
Which is obviously why he had problems with his joints. He had to use walking sticks that had to be reinforced and the like, and special shoes. Terrible for the poor chap. And so these creatures were considerably larger than that. There have been numerous reports of extremely large creatures of that size. So it is, but Alberta probably has the first white person report of a Bigfoot ever being recorded, which was in 1811.
Okay. Tell me a little bit about that.
Would you like to hear about that?
I would like to know more.
Okay, let me find that for you.
Teach me, Paul. Teach me.
So, this was recorded by the legendary explorer of the western US and Canada, David Thompson. And Thompson wrote in his journal in January the 7th, 1811, I saw the track of a large animal that had 4 large toes about 3 to 4 inches long and a small nail at the end of each. The ball of his foot had sunk about 3 inches deeper in than his toes, and the hinder part of his foot did not mark well. The whole track was around 14 inches long by 8 inches wide, and very much resembles a large bear's track. It was in the rivulet in about 6 inches of snow. And 40 years later, when writing his autobiography called The Narrative, he wrote, we'd been continuing on our journey that afternoon when we came upon the track of a large animal. As I mentioned, the snow was about 6 inches deep in the ice. I measured it, along with the 4 large toes, which each were 4 inches in length, all extended to a short claw. We were in no humour to follow it. It seemed to be going north to south. The men and the local Indian guides would have it be a young mammoth, and held it to be in the and I considered it to be the track of a large grizzly bear. Yet the shortness of the nails, the ball of the foot, and its great size were clearly not that of a bear. Otherwise, that it could have been the largest old bear I had known, and its claws had been worn away. My local Indian guide would not allow it to this. And later he mentioned it. Later in the narrative, where he said, I now recur to what I have already noticed in the early part of last winter, when proceeding up the Athabasca River to cross the mountains, in company with men and 4 hunters. On one of the channels of the river, we once again came across the tracks of a large animal, which still measured 14 inches in length. We could see it move on through the tracks for a full 100 yards from us, and the animal was walking north to south. The reports from the old times made the head branches of this river and the mountains of one of the land and the range of a very large animal, which I never appeared to give any credence to. But for these reports it seemed to arise that the fondness for the marvellous is so common to the locals. Yet the sight of this track of such a large beast staggered me, and I have often thought of it, yet I could never bring myself to believe that such an animal could exist, as though I had to consider it must be the track of some monster bear.
Wow.
It was near Jasper. What is Jasper now?
Oh, no kidding.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting. I mean, Jasper, I've never felt, I was only ever in Jasper once, and I was before I really had any interest in anything spooky. I mostly did a lot of drinking there, but it's an interesting little place.
There's loads. That whole mountain range, because you've got Banff, and then there's another national park above Banff.
Okay, yeah. I want to say Peace River, but I don't think that's right.
Jasper National Park, how original.
Oh, there we go.
But yeah, I mean, Alberta technically has the second most range of sightings in Canada. But everybody concentrated on British Columbia. But over the last 20 years, more and more people have investigated it. I mean, you've got hotspots like Medicine Hat. There's tons of reports from there.
Really?
Banff, obviously. There's been sites. Golden, is it?
Yeah.
Grand Prairie, there's loads up there. Fairview, Peace River, Athabasca, as I've mentioned. I mean, there's sightings outside of Edmonton, Calgary, Maple Creek, Catamine, Hinton.
Catamine, really?
Yeah.
So that's interesting because Catamin's a ghost town.
Yeah.
And I actually have a fella I know who got in touch to tell me a weird experience he had in Catamine. Apparently he was driving through Jasper Park with his girlfriend, and they stopped in, I think because it's like Catamine Ghost Town or something. So the girl wanted to stop there. So they went, they got out, and it was empty. But they both felt as though they were being watched. And they were so uncomfortable, despite the fact there was no one obviously around. They were so uncomfortable that they left, and they left fast. So it makes you wonder.
Yeah. There's tons all around that area. Saunders, there's a lot near there. Is it Miette Hot Springs?
Not familiar with it.
Miette.
Probably Miette.
Yeah, near Catamine.
Okay.
So there's like a handful there. You've got tons in the national parks. White Goat, Clyne River, Stephen, 2 or 3 there. Ghost River Wilderness, Exshaw, Peter Lochhead Provisional Park.
Wow, so it's just covered.
The entire length of the range of mountains, going all the way up into British Columbia, there are sightings from the tip of the border all the way down to Montana.
I'll be damned.
All the way down to Fernie and Cranbrook.
Wow, okay. And I mean, and Fernie's got its own series of high strangeness.
So every major, all on that side, everywhere has sighting. I mean, I'm looking at this map, and there's probably 40 from Fernie up to Miette Hot Springs, or however you pronounce it, just the other side of Catamine. So there's 40 from there down to the border. Bragg Creek.
I'll be damned.
There's tons. I mean, there's people that, some of the first accounts of people seeing family Bigfoots were from Alberta in the 70s. There was a 7-person sighting, which is a small town outside of Medicine Hat, who were there were children being chased by a large creature. One of the ones that is quite striking there is that the kids reported it had one of its arms missing. Oh. They're not sure if it had its arm across its chest like it had broken it, or it had lost its arm, because they couldn't really make out 2 arms on it.
Interesting.
And that left 15-inch long footprints. Murray Dam, 2 fishermen were terrified by a creature that seemed to walk around where they were fishing. And they reckoned, after finding the footprints, that they didn't want to start fishing there anymore.
Can't imagine why.
A local farmer claimed that something had broke into his farm and chased all his cows out of their corral. This was 4 days before the 2 boys saw the strange, armless creature. And these were all reported by a local rancher who ended up becoming a Sasquatch hunter called Leonard Edvardson. And there was a massive flap around that particular area, 72, 73, 74.
That is fascinating.
Lake Minnewanka. They've had a tradition going back all the way to the mid-19th century of the Minnewanka wild man.
Okay.
But other than that, doesn't seem to be much happening.
No. Seems really quiet, barely a blip on the radar.
It's a hotbed.
It really is. And I seem to recall the episode that you did with Travis Watson. Was that the one he mentioned that some UFO, like traditional UFO hunters, don't like some of the Alberta stories because they think the creatures are too big?
Yes.
Yeah. I thought that was fascinating. I thought that was really interesting that like even people who do this on the regular have an issue with that just because it doesn't sort of hew to what they expect.
There is a tendency for most Bigfoot researchers to dismiss out of hand any sighting where a creature is reportedly above 9 feet.
Really? That's the cutoff for some reason, is 9 feet.
Yeah. They just think people are being silly. But,
I mean, I guess if I had to entertain a reality where a hairy biped bigger than 9 feet existed in the world, I'd want to think you were being silly too. I've read Luke Phillips' Rogue. I know where that goes. Fuck that shit.
But, as with anything, giganticism exists in all species of living creatures.
Sure.
It happens. As we were just talking about Robert Wadlow.
Yeah.
You know?
And even if going down from Robert Wadlow, there's Yao Ming, right? Like there's just big guys. And so there's no law that says there can't also be big Sasquatch motherfuckers. Like Luke is 6'10". If you told me there's a Sasquatch version of Luke out there where people look at him and go, that's a big fucking guy. Other Sasquatches go, don't screw with him. I'd believe it.
I mean, currently, the tallest man in the world at the minute is a Turkish farmer called Sultan Kosen. And he's 8 foot and almost 3 inches.
Holy Christ.
And he is 42.
Well, hopefully he sees 43.
Yeah. Incredibly, he is the 7th tallest person to have lived.
Really? You know what, man? As embarrassing as it was that time I had to ask someone to get something for me from the back of the milk cabinet at the grocery store, I don't want to be 7 to 8 feet tall. It just seems like a lot of hassle.
Yeah. But yeah, there are weird little... People have these little rules that they don't like to... If it goes beyond those parameters, they immediately dismiss it, which I find peculiar when we're talking about an undiscovered species of hairy primate wandering around North America, that we've got rules.
Well, and I just love that that's the line. Like, that's when it becomes silly. That's when the undiscovered forest monkey gets silly, is when it's above 9 feet. Okay, good to know we have a line.
I mean, they used to, stories about some of the size of bears that are out there, and now we know that grizzlies and polar bears mate, and they are bigger than both.
Of course, yeah.
A big grizzly. Imagine you see a big grizzly on its hind legs, and you think you're talking about something as large as that, weighing, I don't know, 1,000 pounds. So yeah, there's a long history. Thomas Steenberg is probably the best investigator in the area. Obviously, Justin Chernopeski as well. There's a lot of work in Alberta. There used to be an Alberta Sasquatch organisation, but they seem to have been quite quiet the last 2 or 3 years, so I'm not really sure what's going on there.
And that does seem to happen with some paranormal groups. They flourish for a while and then they just sort of drop off the map.
But I mean, there's tons of Canadian sightings on the BFRO website as well. I mean, like I say, they've got a list for Alberta that goes all the way back to 1811. And Class A and Class B. So you've got people seeing creatures at very close quarters. There was one very famous one of a kid who was playing baseball one afternoon. They'd moved to the area and they were in a clearing that had recently been levelled by bulldozers, and so they were having a game of baseball in the afternoon, and as they were playing, they just heard the loudest scream that they'd ever heard in their life.
Jesus.
That finished in a growl, and they all froze and looked at each other thinking, is it a bear? Is it what the hell is that? It started again, but this time it was closer, and they realised it wasn't a bear, because they said it sounded like a person, but somebody really, really big. And so they just dropped everything, dropped their bats and the balls, and they all shot off, and there were 6 of them. But they were saying nobody'd heard anything until that clearing had been made.
Okay, there we go. Bigfoot in Alberta, and in fact, that brings our Alberta episode to a close. I hope you folks have enjoyed it. Hope you've enjoyed exploring the strange, even stranger side of our 4th largest province, our 4th most populous province. They hate knowing they're not number 1, and that makes me smile.
Well, they're number 2 for Bigfoot.
There you go. See, it's not all bad news, Alberta. It's not all bad news.
And Medicine Hat's one of my favourite names of any town I've ever heard of.
It's pretty great. It's right up there with Moose Jaw in Saskatchewan.
There's some great names up there. I mean, you've even got a province named after him, haven't you, Saskatchewan?
Oh, there you go.
America hasn't got Bigfoot land, has it?
I look, Paul, I just think at this point we can't rule out any possibilities. All right, folks, like I said, hope you've enjoyed our show, our Alberta show. If you have stories from Alberta, please let us know, ghoststoryguys@gmail.com. We're also on Instagram as The Ghost Story Guys, and we're on Facebook as The Ghost Story Guys. Finally made a group. And we will be doing, as I said, a bonus show, or I'll be doing a bonus show of Fort McMurray stories for patrons. But again, we would love to hear, generally speaking, stories from Alberta. We'd like to do a show focused just on Calgary. I do have a document set aside for those stories, so that's very possible as well. And so if you have stories from Calgary, or again, anywhere else in the province of Alberta, send them to our email. All right, we're going to take a quick break and we'll be right back. Hey there, listeners. Before you reach for that skip 15 seconds ahead button, I promise you this isn't an ad. We wanted to take a minute to talk to you about mental health. On this show, I've always tried to be as honest and open as possible about my struggles with depression and anxiety, because even though we've come a long way towards acknowledging the very real damage these things can do, there is still way too much lingering stigma about reaching out for help. And when you start to feel like there's no help, it's easy to start feeling like there's no hope. But Paul has joined me today to remind you there is always hope and there's always help.
We're not going to try and talk you out of self-harming right now, because we know that's not how it works. Instead, what we wanted to do was tell you something now and hope that should things get bad, you'll remember it and make a phone call or send a text message before you make any permanent decisions. As someone who knows all too well just how important mental health can be, it's never too late to reach out.
In Canada, the number to call is 133-456-4566. In the USA, the new number to call is 988. That's 988.
In the UK, the number to call is 116123, or text SHOUT, that's SHOUT, to 85258. In Australia, the number to call is 131114. However bad shit seems, it will pass. And no matter what your brain might be telling you at any given moment, and believe me when I say I know this intimately, there are people who love you and people who care deeply about how you treat yourself. Should a time come when you find yourself despairing, please know that we've both been where you are, and there is a way back to the world. Take care. Welcome back. The Ghost Story Guys are Luke Greensmith, who helps us find our stories, Tanya Downing, who helps manage our Facebook community, Sarah Kent, who manages our Reddit community. Our paranormal conductor is Mr. Brennan Storr.
And of course, my friend and co-host is the one, the only, the inimitable Paul Bestel, the paranormal Johnny Carson himself, host of Mysteries and Monsters. Paul, my friend, what's coming up on M&M?
I'm delighted, for the first time in 2 years, to welcome back the one and only Paul Sinclair.
Oh, wow. It's really been 2 years.
Yeah. It's mad, isn't it? Obviously, Paul's a very busy man, but we managed to work out something between us. I was glad I took some time off because I've squeezed some rather nice chats in during that time period. And so, yeah, it's always lovely to speak with Paul. And yeah, it's very interesting and a lot going on for him at the minute.
Very cool. And where can everyone find you online?
You can find Mysteries and Monsters across most social media networks and podcast sites.
Fabulous. I'm largely the truth on Threads, Instagram, Blue Sky, and Letterboxd. And you can find my horror fiction show, Fear Daily, everywhere fine podcasts live. As we said at the top of the show, we couldn't do this without our paid subscribers. Again, we appreciate everyone who listens to the podcast, but folks who support us financially, again, without you, this wouldn't happen. So thank you, thank you, thank you. And if you want bonus shows, extra conversations between myself and Paul, our monthly live stream, or maybe even your name read out in our Ghost Force shoutouts, click the link in the show notes or head to patreon.com/ghoststoryguys. That's patreon.com/ghoststoryguys, or sign up to become a friend of the cabin via Apple Podcasts or YouTube. Finally, our theme song, Radio, Into the Darkness We Go, is composed and performed by Peter Kursov of Pizzanta Music. Find more from him by searching for Pizzanta Music wherever you get your tunes, and they are streaming, of course, courtesy of Night Harvest Recordings. And I guess that's going to do it.
We'll be back next week, but until then,
Into the darkness we go.
everyone's a critic, aren't they? Even cats.
They are, in fact, I think, the harshest critics.
Those gravestones in the back. Those gravestones in the... No, what's going on there? Sorry, my script keeps jumping up and down.
No, that's my fault. Apologies. I'm moving some stuff around, and it didn't occur to me that it would fuck up the place in this. Sorry, my bad.
It's all right.
I'll stop now.
Am I in park?
No, I'm in park, apparently.
Okay. I'm not going mad.
You're not going mad.
Not today.
Got that goddamn delay has come back. We were doing so well. One sec. I'm gonna see if there's something I can do at my end. I'm just wondering if it's maybe.
No, time slows down here in England at 11 o'clock.
Oh well, that means that I believe. Yeah.
We've got to turn the country off to save energy. I have no idea what happened there.
That was very odd.
Yes, good job on recording.
Yeah, no kidding.